He called me into the living room with a frown on his face. My mother sat beside him, her face expressionless. "You're old enough to fend for yourself now. We've done more than enough for you. It's time you learn to stand on your own." I looked to my mother, hoping for some sign of protest, hoping that, for once, she'd stand up for me. But she only looked away. At that moment, she was like a stranger. I left that night. No, kicked out. I remember begging them, even my sisters, but they ignored me.
"We never even liked you in the first place. Leave us alone."
You don't even look like us. You're so different. You clearly don't belong here with us.
You've reminded me of that father of yours since he died. I'm glad we're finally getting rid of you. Leave here.
So, with a few clothes stuffed into an old backpack and nowhere to go, I left. I wandered through the city, sleeping on park benches. I used to believe that family meant love, protection, and loyalty. I thought that no matter what, blood would bind us, keep us together. But looking back, I realized that's not how it went. Not in my house, anyway. My name is George, and I'm currently 28 years old. I have a beautiful family of my own. My lovely wife, Sarah, and our 2 kids who make us happy beyond measure. I'd promised myself to not put my kids through the same childhood I suffered, and I'm so glad I'm making it happen. Years ago, when my father was alive, things were different. He was the kind of man who'd ruffle my hair, pull me onto his lap, and tell me stories about heroes in distant lands. But he wasn't around long enough for me to hold on to more than those blurry, half-finished memories. I was only 6 when he died. A car accident, according to my mom, and leaving her to raise me alone. After his death, my mother changed. I don't know if it was grief or something deeper. She became distant, almost as if she blamed me for his absence. She rarely looked me in the eye, rarely spoke more than a few words to me. When she did, it was cold, dismissive, or outright irritated, as if the sight of me was a bitter reminder of the life she'd lost. Even then, I tried to love her. I tried to understand her silences, her empty looks. She was my mother, after all. And for a child, a mother's approval is everything. Then, when I was 9, she remarried. The man she brought home was charming enough at first, polite to her friends, and sweet to me. My mom and her husband ended up having 2 girls, and he showered them with attention, always calling them his little princesses. But with me, he never even bothered to pretend. The instant we were alone, he changed.
"You're nothing like your sisters. They're good girls, obedient and sweet. You're just a burden."
He'd say things like that over and over until I started believing them. My sisters were like fragile, delicate flowers to him, worthy of protection and affection. And I was a nuisance, nothing more. At first, I thought my mother would notice the way he treated me. I thought maybe she'd tell him to stop, that she'd protect me. But she was as blind to my suffering as she was to my existence. Whenever I tried to tell her, she'd just brush me off, her expression one of irritation.
Why do you always complain? You're so much like your father, always dramatic.
She always had a look that told me to keep quiet, that she was tired of hearing about my problems. I learned quickly to stop expecting anything from her. But it wasn't just the words. My stepfather made his contempt clear in other ways, too. I remember one time during Christmas, I think it was. My stepsisters and I had been sitting by the tree, excitedly unwrapping our gifts. They each got beautiful dolls, clothes, toys that sparkled and gleamed. When it was my turn, my stepfather handed me a small, half-wrapped box with a smirk. Inside was a rough, ugly notebook and a pen that barely worked. I was so confused and hurt, but he just laughed.
"You should be grateful you got anything. I don't owe you a thing."
My mother didn't say a word. She just sat there, sipping her tea, as if my disappointment was invisible to her. It wasn't just the holidays, though. Every day was filled with small cruelties. While my sisters attended a private school, I went to the local public school, where resources were scarce, and the classes were overcrowded. When I asked my mother why I couldn't go with my sisters, she shrugged.
Your stepfather thinks it's best this way. He's paying for it after all. Boys need to toughen up.
The irony was bitter. He wasn't my father, and he'd never treated me like a son. Yet he got to decide every aspect of my life while my mother just watched. I was the outsider, the one left on the fringes of my own family. When I didn't finish my chores fast enough, my stepfather's temper flared. Once he caught me washing dishes a little too slowly for his liking. He yanked me by the collar, his face filled with anger.
Are you useless? Is that why your father left you behind? Because you're worthless?
Those words cut deeper than any slap or shove. My father didn't leave me. He died. But at that moment, my stepfather's words felt like the truth. Like maybe, just maybe, I really was the problem. That night, as I lay in bed, the tears wouldn't stop. My sisters never faced his wrath. To him, they were precious and perfect. If they so much as shed a tear, he was there, comforting them, bringing them sweets, or singing them to sleep. If I cried, he'd only laugh. My mother, though, was the one who hurt me the most. Not because she did anything directly, but because she allowed it all to happen. She'd see the bruises sometimes, the signs that he'd taken things too far, but she'd look away, pretending not to notice.
It's probably for the best. You should be grateful. Your father was a weakling and left you in this world. He's doing what your father couldn't do, so be appreciative and stop complaining.
At 13, I stopped asking for her protection. By then, I'd learned to endure the daily scorn, the indifference. I learned to be quiet, to stay out of their way. I did my best to be invisible, to shrink myself into something they wouldn't notice. But the worst of it came when I turned 16. I remember the day my stepfather decided I'd overstayed my welcome. He called me into the living room with a frown on his face. My mother sat beside him, her face expressionless.
You're old enough to fend for yourself now. We've done more than enough for you. It's time you learn to stand on your own.
I looked to my mother, hoping for some sign of protest, hoping that for once she'd stand up for me. But she only looked away. At that moment, she was like a stranger. I left that night. No, kicked out. I remember begging them, even my sisters, but they ignored me.
We never even liked you in the first place. Leave us alone.
You don't even look like us. You're so different. You clearly don't belong here with us.
You've reminded me of that father of yours since he died. I'm glad we're finally getting rid of you. Leave here.
So, with a few clothes stuffed into an old backpack and nowhere to go, I left. I wandered through the city, sleeping on park benches, doing whatever odd jobs I could find just to survive. I ate once a day, rationing every scrap I could afford. But there was one thing that kept me going, which was football. I always had a passion for football. It was the only thing I had left. The one place where I felt alive, where I could forget about the pain, the rejection, the loneliness. I trained every chance I got, pushing myself harder, faster, and eventually, my dedication paid off. I joined a local academy, one that didn't mind if you couldn't pay as long as you had the talent. When the scouts came, they saw potential. At 18, I was picked up by an agency, and from there, everything changed. I was super rich as a football star. Fame came fast, but it was my freedom that felt like the real victory. I no longer needed anyone, least of all the family that had cast me aside. By 23, I was a household name. People knew my face, cheered my name at matches, and treated me like a hero. I'd achieved everything I'd dreamed of, every success I'd once thought was impossible. I had fancy sports cars, mansions in 2 countries, and I was living my dream life. But then, out of nowhere, my past came back to haunt me. I remember the shock, the disbelief, as I watched the video of my mother and sisters accusing me of abandoning them. They painted me as a selfish son who had turned his back on his struggling family. The internet erupted in outrage, calling me a disgrace, a traitor. My heart pounded with anger and frustration. After everything they'd done to me, they still wanted to take from me, to twist my life into something ugly. I decided to confront them, to put an end to their lies once and for all. When I arrived at their house, it was almost unreal seeing them again, the faces that had once haunted my nightmares. My mother looked older. My sisters, both pregnant, looked at me with shame and embarrassment.
We were desperate, George. That stupid stepfather of yours left us in ruins. He got a new girlfriend and fled. I had no choice.
She'd had plenty of choices. She chose to let him hurt me, to ignore my pleas, to turn her back on me time and again. I pitied them, though. Maybe that was my mistake. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the bond that once existed, the remnants of a family that never truly was. I left them with some money and a promise to visit in my free time. But it wasn't enough for them. The very next day, they posted another video, accusing me of trying to silence them with threats. When I visited again that day to confront them for the second time, they demanded $10 million if I wanted them off my back. I knew I had to end it. So, I played along, told them I'd pay if they recorded a final video telling the truth. They agreed, thinking they'd won. They posted the confession, and I released the audio recording of our deal. The world saw them for who they truly were. People threatened to storm their house. They couldn't step out of the house because there was always someone who would recognize them and cuss at them for their wickedness. In the end, they had to flee to my grandmother's old house, hiding from the anger they'd stirred. Unfortunately for them, once people noticed they had fled, they burned their house, causing my mom to lose everything. They tried to contact me several times so I could speak to the public, but I refused. They deserved everything they were getting. My mother got depression and anxiety, her guilt consuming her until it took her life 1 year later. My sisters were left to pick up the pieces of their broken lives. The eldest one had lost her baby in childbirth. The complications had left her with injuries that confined her to the floor, crawling because she couldn't afford a wheelchair. My youngest sister faced her own hardships. She tried to find work, but was turned away from most jobs once people recognized her face. The rumors followed her, the disgrace of their actions clinging like a shadow. Her son grew up in poverty, without comfort or protection. I later heard rumors that my stepfather had fled with a mafia boss's money from a deal they made, and 2 masked men had broken into his house and kidnapped him. He hasn't been found since. For years, they were haunted by the choices they'd made, but they never reached out to me again. There were moments I thought of them, wondered if I could have forgiven them, tried to offer some kind of peace, but the damage was done. Eventually, I found my own peace. I married my wife, started a family, and devoted myself to the sport that had saved me. My new family became my true home, a place where love wasn't conditional or weaponized. Now, I don't look back in anger or regret. I look back in understanding. I know who I am, what I endured, and what I became in spite of it all. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.
While I tried to avoid them verbally, it appeared that my presence, physically, annoyed them. They wouldn't walk past me without hitting me. My mom would pour all the chores on me and ask me to finish them at an impossible time. When I don't do so, which is always, she would hit me for it. Barely 5 months after. Scenes a revolve, I'd lost a lot of weight and had bruises all over my body. Hi, my name's Penelope. You might be wondering why I'm in front of a police station. Well, my mom just got locked up and I'd come to see her for a conversation. Nope, it's not one that would lead to her coming out soon. I would rather she remains there for the rest of her life. I'm not a bad daughter. In fact, I've been good to her for as long as I can. I'm an only child. My dad worked as the vice president in his father's company, so we were rich. We stayed in a mansion my dad built with his money, and we had cars and everything. I grew up in wealth. My dad loves me, especially. We were practically best friends. My mom loved me too, but I was closer to my dad. They both made me feel comfortable, but I felt more with my dad. I often told him about my worries and he comforted me. However, things took a tragic turn when he suddenly fell ill. At first it was mild and he only had to skip work for a few hours. Rather than leave home at the usual time, he would stay back for 2 to 3 hours and return home earlier than usual. I was forced to ask him what the problem was.
It's nothing serious, Princess. I just need to rest more. I'll be fine and strong before you know it.
His assurance was all I needed. I took his words and hoped for when he'd become better, but he only got worse. Soon he had to be admitted to the hospital, and I knew it was more serious than I knew. I didn't know what it was until I overheard my mom talking to my grandmother over the phone, one day after my dad's admission. My grandparents were in Italy, so they had no idea what was going on. According to my mom, my dad had cancer, and he was at a delicate stage. I didn't fully understand, but from how my mom sounded, I knew it was very serious. That made me sad. When we went to see him at the hospital, he'd gotten so pale. It was so quick, the changes. I cried in his arms, hoping for him to get better very quickly. Unfortunately, my father's health kept deteriorating. The drugs didn't seem to be working, and the doctor said the cancer was spreading very quickly. I saw my mom turn into a crying mess every night, praying for my dad to get better. It was a devastating period for our family. Eventually, after 1 year of suffering and trying different treatments, death took my dad. He died at night while my grandparents were watching him. That was the saddest day of my entire life. I cried until I passed out. When I woke up, the thought of not seeing my dad again registered in my head, and fresh tears rolled down my eyes. My mother looked like she wanted to die with him. She kept asking them to let her go. Time passed by very quickly. His funeral was done, and we had to learn how to live without him. My grandparents and my dad's brother were so kind to us. They put my mom on a monthly salary and took over taking care of me and all my expenses. Life wasn't the same without my dad. I watched my mom become a shadow of herself. She was always crying. If she wasn't sobbing, she had tears in her eyes, waiting to be shed. I tried to be strong for her, even though I was also deeply affected. The house became quiet. My mom rarely talked. Luckily, we had maids, and I was able to have little conversations with them. I patiently waited for when my mom would finally recover from the pain of losing her husband. Time passed, and soon, 2 years had gone by since I lost my dad. My mom was better and was slowly starting to go for outings again. It was a big deal for me, and I was happy. I noticed her always speaking to someone over the phone, and that person always made her laugh and show happiness. I didn't know who it was, but I was grateful to the person for helping my mother out of her depression. Day by day, her smile brightened even more. One day, I approached her to ask about it. I wanted to know if it was a friend of hers, as I felt obligated to thank whoever it was.
It's a friend of mine. Would you like to meet him? He's been asking to meet you, but I didn't know how to tell you about it.
I agreed to meet him. I was so excited. When he came, I wasn't surprised how he was able to make my mom feel better. Sean was so nice and full of good energy. He made me laugh so much with his jokes, and I was immediately connected to him. 2 months later, my mom revealed that she was dating him and asked if he could move in with us. I agreed. Sean was a good person, at least. That's what I thought. The first month was good. He was still nice to me and helped well with my mom. He would take us out to dates and do so many fun things with us. I felt as though my dad sent him to us, and I thought he was an angel. However, things changed after the first month. Sean became a completely different person. Yes, he was still close to my mom, but he began distancing himself from me. I didn't mind at first, but when it got to a stage where he stopped talking to me completely, I had to talk to him. Did I do something to offend you, Sean? You've been avoiding me? Did I do something wrong? I thought he was going to give me a reason, but the reply I got was a slap that sent me to the floor.
Who the hell are you to question me in my house? Huh?
That person wasn't the Sean I knew a month ago. I tried to speak again, but that only worsened it. He slapped me twice and kicked me roughly on my back. Afterward, he left me there in tears. I'd thought my mom would do something about it after I told her, but she only shunned me and asked me out of her sight, claiming that I was trying to lie against Sean because I was jealous of her happiness. It sounded so stupid. I couldn't believe she would say something like that. I was only 13. How could I be jealous of her relationship? Anyway, I tried to avoid them from then on. I only spoke when I was spoken to, and ensured to not get on their nerves. Unfortunately, that didn't work. While I tried to avoid them verbally, it appeared that my presence, physically, annoyed them. They wouldn't walk past me without hitting me. My mom would pour all the chores on me and ask me to finish them at an impossible time. When I don't do so, which is always, she would hit me for it. Barely 5 months after. Scenes a revolve, I'd lost a lot of weight and had bruises all over my body. One time, he'd smashed a dish on the floor in anger, very close to my feet. Somehow, some of the pieces met my skin and injured me, making me have bruised feet too. My mom stopped sending me to the hair salon, so my hair was in a bad condition too. I was forced to cut it, regardless of how much I cherished how long it was. The cut was uneven, but I didn't mind. Neither my mom nor Sean even acknowledged it. Mom and Sean turned me into their slave. I had to even mow the lawn, cook for them and serve them, and clean the whole house. They began throwing parties in the house, drinking and smoking with dangerous-looking people. I was always scared to leave my room and had to stay longer in school. About 7 months later, when I couldn't hold it in anymore, I visited my uncle and told him about everything. He wanted to go to my mom, but I refused. I didn't want to continue living with her. Without wasting time, he called my grandparents. They were pissed to hear about my mom's behaviors. They immediately arranged for me to relocate to Italy to be with them. I thought my mom would oppose it, but the reverse was the case.
You can take her, I don't give a damn. I would have sold her off or something if y'all had come to take her later. To hell with you, Penelope.
I was hurt and felt betrayed, but there was nothing I could do. I needed my sanity, so I left with my grandparents. For 10 whole years, my mom didn't call me. I heard from my uncle that she was living her life with Sean. It hurt me so much, but I didn't dwell on it for too long. Once I clocked 24, my grandfather passed away. It was sad news for me, as he and my grandmother had acted like my parents. I was so devastated, but I needed to be strong for my grandmother. He was given a proper funeral, then his will was read. He divided his properties between my uncle, I, and my grandmother. Things took a different turn when my uncle gave me 80% of his, as he was wealthy himself and thought I deserved it more. My grandmother gave all of hers to me. I felt so loved. I needed to return to my birth country to take over my grandfather's company. I took my grandmother with me, since I couldn't leave her alone. However, news somehow got to my mom about the inheritance I received, and she found her way to the mansion I lived in with my grandmother. She knelt before us in tears.
I don't know what came over me. I regretted letting you go, Penelope. I still do. I'm your mother and I love you. I would never intentionally throw you out of my life. Your father's death made me mentally unstable that I was just doing so many things wrongly. I already started receiving therapy. I'm trying to be a good mother again.
I wanted to forgive her. I wanted to see her get better and make up for her wrongdoings. So I did. I forgave her. My grandmother also did. She began visiting the house again, and I ensured that I always gave her money whenever she came. However, things took a different turn when I started getting calls from my bank about suspicious withdrawals and spending. I was informed about the purchase of a car, luxury items, and lavish trips on my card. Only then did I realize my card had been stolen and that my mom was a prime suspect. She'd left a lot of debt in the card. She did stop visiting for a month, so I knew she'd use that time to live lavishly with Sean. I couldn't take it. I immediately reported her to the police. The credit card was locked, so she couldn't use it anymore. The next day, she visited me. While I pretended to get her water, I called the police. Barely 20 minutes later, they arrived, and my mom was arrested and put behind bars. I went straight to my dad's house afterward, with more policemen, and threw Sean out of the house, ignoring his pleas. 3 days later, he tried to break into my house at night but got electrocuted by the barbed wires. His scream woke us up. On seeing him on the floor, the police were immediately contacted, and he was taken. At the station, he confessed that my mom had told him to break into my house to steal some money. Apparently, she'd found a place in the library where I kept my money. He was also put behind bars immediately, and my mom's jail term was increased by 5 more years. No matter how much she begged me, I refused to forgive her a second time. I also warned her to never show herself before me if she got out alive, or I was going to send her back to jail. I hope she adheres because I would definitely not go back on my words. An evil mother like her deserves no atom of pity from me. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment. I flew over there, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my chest. When I got to her place, she was on the floor, her face swollen from crying, and her hand pressed against her stomach. Roger was nowhere in sight.
He left. He said it was my fault, Grace. My fault.
Tabby, honey, this is not your fault. Tell me what happened. As it turned out, Roger had come home from work all frustrated and noticed that Tabitha was making a dish that our mother had taught us to make. He got so angry and screamed at her for making disgusting food and said some rather racist things about our parents that I will not repeat. Suffice to say that my opinion of him became all that much worse. When Tabitha told him not to say such hurtful things, he grew even more angry and started to hit her. She fell to the ground and he started to kick her, which suddenly caused her to bleed profusely. He fled, and she managed to crawl across the floor, grab her phone, and call for an ambulance. When she went to the hospital, they told her that she had lost the baby. Hi, my name is Grace, and this is my story about how I was forced to play the role of judge, jury, and executioner. I think I was justified with what I did, but you might not agree. That is for you to decide. At any rate, from the first time my sister Tabitha brought Roger home, there was something about him that prickled under my skin. He walked in with this smug grin, his hand gripping my sister's arm a little too tightly, and he gave me this once-over, a smirk that made my stomach churn. I wanted to tell her, "Girl, don't you dare settle for this one." But of course, Tabitha had stars in her eyes. She saw something in him that none of us could understand. "Hi there, so you're the man that my sister is infatuated with, huh?"
Yep. It must be confusing to finally have a winner in the family.
A winner? What's that supposed to mean?
Oh, nothing. It's just that I doubt most of your family ever went to college or had real jobs.
Excuse me?
Sorry, Grace. Roger has a really odd sense of humor. You get used to it over time.
Tabitha was always so quick to forgive Roger, brushing off his odd language or insults as just joking. But I could tell by his expression that he wasn't joking. He clearly did not like our family. And when I looked at his social media posts, comments like how black people are rapists, love-eating dogs, and are only good for sports, I knew instantly he was racist. I probably should have shown the post to Tabitha, but I made the mistake of keeping my mouth shut. She was happy, and I didn't want to be the reason my only sister became unhappy. Tabitha and I weren't blood sisters, but you couldn't tell us that. Our parents adopted her when she was 6. I was 8 at the time, and for as long as I could remember, it was always me and Tabby against the world. We couldn't have looked more different. Me with my mahogany skin and coiled curls. Her with her pale cheeks and a mess of blonde hair. We'd even laugh about how people would do a double take whenever we called each other sister. But our bond was real, solid. So when she fell for Roger, I felt like he'd stepped right into our sisterhood, infecting something sacred. After they got married, he started showing his true colors. First, he insisted that Tabitha stop working and stay home as a housewife to cook and clean. Every now and then, he'd make snide comments when we were all together. One day at a family cookout, he made a remark about the food.
Yeah, I'm not used to this kind of food.
What kind of food? Soul food?
Yeah, I'm used to normal food.
If you don't like it, no one's forcing you to eat, Roger.
Oh, I'm fine. Guess I'm just used to food that with a little less kick and just not so weird, if you know what I mean.
Tabitha looked at me with pleading eyes. She always knew how to get me to back down. I wanted to say something, but Tabitha whisked me away and spoke to me in private.
Grace, please, just let it slide. He's having a bad day and doesn't mean what he's saying.
I knew full well that she was wrong and that Roger was an evil piece of crap. But once again, I bit my tongue, which got increasingly harder to do. The worst was watching how he treated her. At first, it was subtle. He'd make jokes at her expense, criticize her clothes, her weight, and then brush it off as if he were just kidding. Sometimes, after a few drinks, he'd get meaner, but he always stopped before it got too obvious. He was a master of keeping just within the line. No marks, no bruises, just hurt feelings and damaged self-esteem. I remember one time when he was drunk, he visited us and asked me where I worked. When I told him I work at a popular robotics company, he was shocked and asked,
How did you get such job?
"What do you mean?"
I mean, as a black anyways, never mind.
I knew he was surprised a black could get such job, but anyways, I let that slide. One night, I went over to Tabitha's to drop off some clothes I had borrowed, and I heard them through the door. Roger's voice was low, but his words were like poison, seething and full of contempt. He was shouting at her and hitting her for not having dinner ready on time. As soon as she opened the door, her eyes were red-rimmed, and she looked small, almost shrinking in on herself. "Everything okay?"
Yeah, just fine.
She was trembling as she reached for the bag I handed her. My protective instincts were screaming at me to do something, but instead I kept quiet. I hadn't seen anything with my own eyes, and I didn't want to cause any drama. Roger appeared behind her, throwing me one of his smirks.
Grace. Always coming to check on us, huh?
He placed his hand on Tabitha's shoulder, gripping it like he owned her. I swallowed my anger. Yeah, I just wanted to see my sister,
Well, I think we were just about to turn in for the night, weren't we, babe?
he said, his fingers digging into her shoulder. Tabitha winced, nodding a little too quickly.
Yes. Yeah. Grace, I'll call you tomorrow, okay?
After that night, I started noticing more things. Small signs that confirmed everything I feared. Roger was abusive toward her. My parents noticed too, and we began urging her to leave him.
You don't need this, Tabby. You have us. You can always come home.
I know how it looks, guys, but he loves me. It really looks worse than it is.
But she was terrified, like so many women in her situation are. She told me once when we were alone that she was scared to leave, scared he might find her if she ran. And as angry as I was, I understood that kind of fear. It sits deep in your bones, making it hard to see anything else. Then she told us she was pregnant. I tried to be happy for her, I really did. She had this glow, this hope in her eyes that reminded me of the old Tabitha, the one who was full of life and joy.
Maybe this will change things. Maybe he'll soften.
I really hope so, Tabitha. Although I have my doubts.
You guys don't know him like I do. This will make things better. I know it will.
I didn't believe it. Neither did my parents, but we all kept our mouths shut. We were walking on eggshells around her, afraid that if we pushed too hard, she'd retreat even further. And then, one night, everything shattered. Tabitha called me, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words.
Grace. He hurt me. I think I lost the baby.
I flew over there, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my chest. When I got to her place, she was on the floor, her face swollen from crying, and her hand pressed against her stomach. Roger was nowhere in sight.
He left. He said it was my fault, Grace. My fault.
Tabby, honey, this is not your fault. Tell me what happened. As it turned out, Roger had come home from work all frustrated and noticed that Tabitha was making a dish that our mother had taught us to make. He got so angry and screamed at her for making disgusting food and said some rather racist things about our parents that I will not repeat. Suffice to say that my opinion of him became all that much worse. When Tabitha told him not to say such hurtful things, he grew even more angry and started to hit her. She fell to the ground and he started to kick her, which suddenly caused her to bleed profusely. He fled, and she managed to crawl across the floor, grab her phone, and call for an ambulance. When she went to the hospital, they told her that she had lost the baby. Distraught, she then went home and called me. I don't know why she didn't call me to tell me that she went to the hospital, but I wasn't going to give her crap for that at the moment. I then called our parents, and they arrived shortly afterwards. We knew we couldn't let this continue. We decided that night, enough was enough. We packed up Tabitha's belongings, and we took her over to our parents' house. A couple of days later, Roger came over to my parents' house, demanding to see Tabitha. He barged into the living room, his face twisted with anger.
Get out, Roger. I'm here to see my wife. None of you have any right to keep her from me. I don't take orders from inhuman trash like you.
She doesn't want to see you. After what you did, you're lucky we don't call the police.
What I did? She's the one who's too weak to handle a real man. It's her fault she lost the kid. But is it any wonder? After being raised by lazy degenerates like you people, no wonder she is so pathetic. White babies should never be raised by black people. It's unnatural.
I felt something snap inside me. I stepped between him and my parents, my voice steady. You're done, Roger. You don't get to talk about her or us like that ever again. You don't get to come near her again.
And who's going to stop me? You?
He lunged forward, shoving my dad back against the wall. My mom tried to pull him off, but he pushed her too, hard enough that she stumbled. In that moment, all the fear, all the rage that had been building inside me came to the surface. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a heavy glass vase on the table, and swung it, hitting him hard across the head. He fell, clutching his head, blood trickling down his temple. Get out, Roger. This is over. He glared up at me, his eyes full of hate. He let my father go, and then started to stumble towards me. From his back pocket, he pulled out a switchblade knife, and the look in his eyes told me that he intended to use it. Terrified, I ran over to my purse and I grabbed something that I never thought I would have to use in a million years. I pulled out my handgun and I pointed at Roger. He didn't flinch when he saw it. Instead, he started to charge towards me and I pulled the trigger 3 times, hitting him in the chest all 3 times. He staggered and then fell to the ground dead. Shortly afterwards, we called the police, and while I had to spend the night at the police station, they ruled that it had all been self-defense, and I wasn't charged with anything. I thought for sure that Tabitha would have been torn up by not only losing her baby, but losing Roger as well. But she surprised me. He had hurt her. He had killed their child. The moment her baby died, so too did her love for him. She later told me that her only regret was that she hadn't been the one to pull the trigger. In the weeks that followed, a weight seemed to lift from her. She moved back home with us, and for the first time in years, I saw her laugh, really laugh. It was like she was coming back to life, rediscovering herself piece by piece. Therapy helped, both for her and for all of us, and eventually, she began to heal. Years went by, and then one day, she met someone new. His name was Marcus, a gentle, kind man who treated her like a queen. He loved her scars and all, and when they married, I was her maid of honor. She told me once, just before she walked down the aisle, "Thank you, Grace, for saving me, for never giving up on me." Now every time I look at her with Marcus, I see the love she deserves. And I know in my heart is that she is safe, that she is cherished. And as for me, I have my sister back, the real her, full of strength and light. The nightmare of Roger is a shadow in the past, but it's over. Finally, it's over. And while I feel bad that it took such a drastic event to make it better, I would happily do it again. As for me, I am currently dating a nice guy too. Wish me luck, so that this leads to marriage as well. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like button so YouTube can recommend this video to others.
While my own accomplishments were often overshadowed and overlooked. James, why can't you be more like Ella? Look at her making us proud. I'm disappointed in you. Every time I made a mistake, or even stumbled through a spelling test, my father would lament about how much of a dumbass I was. Ella always seemed to be floating in her greatness. One day, Ella stole Mom's car and went for a ride. She had a minor accident and broke the car's front light. When our parents returned, she pretended to be ill and told them that I had taken the car for a joyride. Without hesitation, Dad slapped me and grounded me for a week. From then on, I was given most of the chores at home, like mowing the lawn and cleaning, while Ella would be on her phone, chatting with her friends. As the years passed, our relationship shifted from sibling friendship to a fierce rivalry. From the day Ella was born, my world began to revolve around her, and I quickly realized I was in for a lifetime of competition. My name's James, and this is my story. As a child, I didn't fully understand it, but my parents made it clear that my little sister was their golden child. Even as infants, they would snap countless pictures of her, while I lingered quietly in the background, feeling like a ghost in my own home.
Look at her smile. Isn't she the cutest thing?
I didn't ask for much. All I wanted was just a little acknowledgement, a pat on the back, but that seemed to be reserved solely for Ella. It was like living in the shadow of a bright light, and as we grew older, that shadow only got bigger. In elementary school, Ella quickly became known as a genius. My parents made sure she was in the same class as me. She learned to read before most of our classmates and picked up musical instruments with a skill that astonished everyone. My parents paraded her achievements around, boasting to friends and family, while my own accomplishments were often overshadowed and overlooked. James, why can't you be more like Ella? Look at her making us proud. I'm disappointed in you. Every time I made a mistake, or even stumbled through a spelling test, my father would lament about how much of a dumbass I was. Ella always seemed to be floating in her greatness. One day, Ella stole Mom's car and went for a ride. She had a minor accident and broke the car's front light. When our parents returned, she pretended to be ill and told them that I had taken the car for a joyride. Without hesitation, Dad slapped me and grounded me for a week. From then on, I was given most of the chores at home, like mowing the lawn and cleaning, while Ella would be on her phone, chatting with her friends. As the years passed, our relationship shifted from sibling friendship to a fierce rivalry. Every school play, art competition, and academic challenge morphed into a battleground. Ella was always watching and waiting for the moment to one-up me. It became a constant game of one-upmanship that I never signed up for. One day, I announced that I was going to be the school's president. I was proud of my decision to run, and hoped my parents would be too. However, the reverse was the case.
Oh, that's nice, James. But you know Ella would make a great president too, don't you?
Her words felt like a slap to my face. It didn't matter that I had a good chance. Ella had somehow managed to try to steal the spotlight yet again. Sure enough, she signed up to run against me, launching her own campaign filled with slogans and promises that seemed to outshine my own. I cried my eyes out because I knew she'd win. Ella had a knack for manipulating situations to her advantage. I remember vividly the time I was selected for a special science project. I poured my heart into it, working tirelessly, only to find Ella showing up with a more elaborate display on the day of the fair. Well, despite the situation, I managed to maintain decent grades and keep my head above water. But as we entered senior high school, the favoritism towards Ella grew stronger. She became the star athlete, leading her teams to victory, while my modest accomplishments felt less and less significant in comparison. Family gatherings became unbearable. My parents gushed over her athletic achievements, celebrating every win while I sat quietly, pretending not to notice. I wanted to shout, to demand attention, but it felt futile.
Did you see Ella score the winning goal last week? What a star! She's my true blood, always winning.
She's my true blood too.
Everyone laughed at their little argument. Ella thrived on the attention, soaking up every bit of praise like a sponge. It felt as though no matter what I did, I would always remain in her shadow. The competition became my new normal. Every day felt like a fight for validation and recognition. As college approached, I clung to the hope that I could finally break free from the cycle of rivalry. I pursued a degree in political science, dreaming of a career in public service where I could make a real difference. But of course, Ella had her own plans. She went for the same degree and announced her intentions to run for local office immediately after I did.
Oh, James, maybe you should just let Ella take this one. She has a real talent for this. You know it suits her more than you. Oh dear, I can't even understand why you went for politics.
It felt suffocating. Our political ambitions clashed in a way that was both expected and shocking. Ella and I began campaigning for the same position. The stakes felt higher than ever. I poured my heart into my campaign with a determination I had never known before, hoping to outshine her once and for all. Ella, however, was not one to back down easily. She unleashed a ruthless side I had never seen before. She spread rumors about my character, claiming I was dishonest and untrustworthy.
What kind of person does that? She's so desperate to beat you. Is she even your true sister? That's definitely not how a real sister behaves. She's so unfair.
No matter how hard I fought back, Ella continued her onslaught. She had our parents behind her, cheering her on and fueling her fire. It felt like the entire family had turned against me, leaving me to fight alone in a battle I had never wanted. Despite the obstacles, I refused to give up. I hosted community events, engaged with voters, and made it clear that I was committed to making real change in our town. But Ella's dark tactics reached new heights. One day, I discovered her plan to sabotage my fundraising event. I had spent weeks organizing it, and when I showed up, I found my supplies destroyed and my guests turned away. Ella stood at the entrance, smirking as she reveled in my failure. Did you do this?
Who, me? Why would you ask me that? I just came to support the community and my lovely elder brother.
It was such an obvious lie. Her eyes said it all. But how could I hold her responsible when she was so smooth with it and made it impossible to find any evidence against her? It became apparent that she was willing to do whatever it took to win, even if it meant tearing me down. The rivalry had grown toxic. Ella's last-ditch effort to eliminate me was to hire someone to plant drugs in my car, hoping for my arrest. I had no idea, of course. I was on my way to where I'd be giving my campaign speech when the police pulled me over.
Drugs were found in your vehicle. Care to explain that?
I was arrested. Thankfully, the news didn't go round and I didn't have to spend more than a night at the station because the man she hired to plant the drugs in my car decided to snitch on her. Apparently, Ella was too stingy to pay him completely and called his threat to expose her a bluff. I was immediately released after he provided evidence of his claims. The scandal that followed was overwhelming. The news spread like wildfire, painting Ella and my parents in the worst light imaginable. Apparently, my parents and Ella had conspired to sabotage me. It didn't take long before they were arrested, handcuffed, and led away, leaving me to pick up the pieces of my campaign. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was stepping into the light, free from the shackles of my family's favoritism. With my parents and sister gone, I won the election for city council, a position I had long dreamed of. I made changes that resonated with the community and gave back in ways that truly mattered. 5 years passed, and I continued to grow in my political career. I became a respected voice in our town, advocating for change and earning the trust of the people. I even married a wonderful woman named Sarah, and together we welcomed 2 beautiful children into the world. Life was good, and I felt proud of what I had built. But then came the day when my parents and Ella were released from prison. I received a call from my mother.
James, we need your help. We've lost everything. We have no one to turn to now. Please help us.
You need my help now? Wow, you should have thought about that before you plotted against me. You don't deserve my help. I owe you nothing. But we're family. Don't be ridiculous. You can't just turn your back on us. That was the moment I realized that they still thought they had a right to my life and my success. I was furious. I remembered all the years of favoritism, manipulation, and betrayal. I built my life from the ground up while you tore each other down. You think I owe you something after everything you've done. You had your chance, and you threw it away. Deal with your problems yourself. I hung up the phone. I had thought it was over, but they had become increasingly desperate to reconnect with me, and it quickly morphed into an obsession. They began showing up uninvited at events I organized, lingering outside the doors, watching me like hawks. There was no doubt that they were stalking me. Their messages flooded my phone, apologies, pleas for forgiveness, and reminders of our shared blood. At first, I tried to ignore them, but their persistence was maddening. They left notes on my car, calling me ungrateful, demanding to know why I wouldn't just help them get back on their feet. Things escalated one fateful evening when my children and I were playing in the backyard. I spotted my father hiding near the edge of the trees. I immediately took my kids, rushed inside, and locked the door. I couldn't believe they had the audacity to show up at my home. The next day, I received a call from my mother.
James, if you don't help us, you'll regret it. We know where your children are, and we know where your wife works.
I was afraid for my wife and children's safety. I rushed to the police station to report the threats and immediately filed for a restraining order. However, my family broke the terms repeatedly, showing up at events, trying to get my attention. Their behavior became bolder and more reckless. They would stand outside my office waiting for me. They would run after my car, yelling at me. One night, I was alone in my living room when I began hearing noises. I checked from my window and saw my security guards beating up some people. I immediately went outside to check, only to see Ella and my parents. Apparently, they'd tried to break in my house, but my security guards caught them. The guards had mistook them for robbers and beat them up. I let them beat my parents and Ella until they could barely move before I called the police. The police arrived within minutes. I was so relieved as I watched them handcuff my parents and Ella, pushing and treating them like the criminal they were. They were dragged out of my building because they could barely walk. The next day, I was at the station to press charges. This time, they would face real consequences for their actions. Since the previous 5-year jail term wasn't enough to teach them a lesson, I hoped they would get a longer one. And of course, 1 month later, they each got 10 years imprisonment for their continuous harassment, breaking into my house, stalking me, and disobeying the terms in the restraining order. The news relieved me. It was hard to admit, but I enjoyed seeing them fall from grass to an even messier grass again. They had turned their lives into a mess, and I felt zero guilt for putting them in their places. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment. Their eyes were visible, so I could see the shock in them. I immediately pounced on them, hitting them with both the sticks and my hands everywhere. They were soon on the floor, writhing in pain. Their voices sounded so familiar, but my memory wasn't working at that point. Being a black in a white community surely meant one would experience racism from the racists. Being trash-talked, called an ape, getting suspected of being involved in any unfortunate incident that occurs. I'm sure you'll agree with me that all of those often comes with being with whites as a black person. I'm a victim. But before we go into that, let me give a background. I grew up in a black environment. We weren't poor. My parents were very hardworking and had great jobs. My mom was an accountant while my dad was a lawyer. There were a few whites there, but I adored them. I never spoke to them because my family had raised me to always mind my business. But I met their kids at school. As much as I adored them and would have loved to be friends, I kept to myself because they made it clear that they didn't like we blacks. They never spoke to us, and even ensured that they sat together and not with us. It would have been better if we all ignored each other like that, but they suddenly began to pick on me. Whenever I walked past them, they'd intentionally stick their legs out and make me trip and fall. Other times, they would hide my notes and only bring it back after the day was over. Luckily, my parents always kept extra notes at home, so I took one with me every day. Whenever they took my notes, I would write in the extra one, and when they returned it, I would transfer the written notes. It was stressful, but I didn't want to confront them to avoid a fight. Perhaps they were frustrated because I refused to respond to them. They decided to take it further. After school was over, they cornered me on my way home and beat hell out of me after I refused to act like an ape. When my parents returned home and saw me, they were livid. They took permission from their workplace to be absent and followed me to school the next day. The head of the school was shocked after I told him all they'd been doing. He summoned the particular boys that beat me up and suspended them for 2 weeks. Afterward, he sent a warning to the others, threatening to expel them if he ever heard of them being racists again. Also, they all apologized to me and the other black students. The parents of the culprit didn't like the head of the school's judgment. Out of anger, they withdrew their kids. Anyway, that was my first taste of racism. My parents both got promoted together. Coincidentally, they were also sent to the same city. We had to relocate from there. I grew up seeing my parents as my idols. They worked so hard and ensured I got whatever I wanted. Of course, without spoiling me. I soon finished my college education and graduated with a distinction in my major. It wasn't hard to get a job. I was employed as the head marketer in the company with a great pay. My parents were so proud of me. Due to how impressed they were, they got me a car, the latest Mercedes. My joy was beyond control. I'd been eyeing the car and had planned to get it after renting an apartment. I was so excited when they gifted it to me and thanked me for being a good son and making them proud. I told them about wanting to get an apartment, and they offered to help me with it, but I refused. They'd done enough for me. Instead, I agreed on them assisting me in finding a good place. Barely a week later, a friend called me and told me about a great apartment he saw. I went to check it out, and it was exactly what I wanted. The price was also within my budget, so it was perfect. The area also seemed to be serene, so I decided to go for it. I called my parents, and the next day, they went there with me. However, there was a problem. I discovered that there were a lot of white people there. That didn't sit really well with me. The house owner did assure me that everyone minded their business, but I was still uncertain.
Take the house, son. You're bold enough to face them if anything happens.
I agreed. I wasn't raised to be a chicken. I cleared every uncertainty from my mind and paid for it. The next day, with the help of a few friends, I moved all my things in and arranged the house. I'd completely changed the interior to suit my taste, and I couldn't be more proud of myself. That night, we held a small party to celebrate. The next morning, after my friends left, I decided to clean the house. After cleaning and arranging, I took the trash outside to empty it. As I glanced to my left, I saw a white man and his wife standing together, staring at me with the meanest gaze I'd ever seen. I looked away, ignoring them, and emptied my trash. However, as I turned to leave, I heard them whistle loudly. I paused for a second, but I soon began walking again, ignoring them. Before I got to my door, a strong hand suddenly grabbed me by my shoulder and stopped me. I turned to see the couple. Excuse me? What do you want from me?
We're here to warn you. We know your type. We saw the dangerous people you brought in. Who knows? Y'all could be kidnappers or even killers.
If you dare try anything funny, we're going to report your black ass to the cops. Got it?
I was speechless for a few seconds. The man's hand was still on my shoulder. I pushed it off. Firstly, get your filthy hands off me. How dare you both come into my space to accuse me and my friends of being kidnappers and killers? Do you know I can also call the cops on you for this?
I dare you. We won't warn you after this. Don't even glance at our part of this house.
As they turned to leave, I heard the man mutter, "Asshole, nigga." They surely went too far, but it was good that they came first. I was glad I hadn't said hi to them, as I was planning to. I wanted to be comfortable with them being my neighbors. But after that, I definitely didn't want to anymore. I kept to myself like they advised, but they didn't do the same. I returned home one day to meet boxes of pizza, bad lettuce, ketchup sprinkled on the floor, and so many other dirt. Without needing to be told, I knew it was them. I didn't say anything. Instead, I packed all the dirt and trashed them. Then I went into my house. 2 days later, when I returned from work, I met my kitchen walls, counter and floor, stained and smelly. There was water on the counter and on the floor. My kitchen was facing theirs, and the dirty water couldn't just emerge magically, so I knew they'd done something. But then, how did they manage to get into my apartment? I had no proof. I stormed to their house and banged on their door. As if they'd been waiting, they both answered the door. I confronted them about what they did, but they both denied it.
Not everyone lies like you, black ass. Also, we're not jobless. We don't have time to fool around.
I know you're both lying, but I'm gonna let it slide. Let this be the last time you play such silly games with me. Am I clear?
Huh? Are you crazy? Warning us like we're kids.
What difference is there between what you're doing and what kids do? Absolutely nothing. Don't repeat this, please.
And if we do, what will you do? Take out a gun and shoot us? It's how you black people are. So dangerous.
I didn't want to get angrier than I already was, so I simply walked away from them. I returned to my apartment and cleaned the whole kitchen. That weekend, I visited my parents. While we were discussing, I told them about what my neighbors were doing to me. My parents advised me to report the issue to the authorities if they continued, and I agreed to do so. For about a week, they didn't disturb me. I'd thought all was settled until another white man suddenly visited me. According to him, my neighbor and her husband had spread news that I was a fraud and a human trafficker.
They said you're using the money you acquire illegally to fund your luxurious lifestyle. According to them, you bought the Mercedes after selling human parts of your victims.
That was too much of an accusation, and I wasn't going to take it. I thanked the man before leaving home. I needed to be at a very important place, so I postponed confronting my neighbors until I got back. I spent nearly 2 days out because something more important came up, and I had to stay back. When I finally returned home, I saw my door was broken. I panicked, wondering if a thief had broken in. I'd been told the area was safe, so what was going on? And I grabbed a stick lying nearby and walked into the house, cautiously. On getting in, I found my living room in ruins. The chairs were upturned, papers lying about. I was pissed, but I held my anger in. I quietly went up the stairs. When I got to my room, 2 masked people holding cameras turned to me. Their eyes were visible, so I could see the shock in them. I immediately pounced on them, hitting them with both the sticks and my hands everywhere. They were soon on the floor, writhing in pain. Their voices sounded so familiar, but my memory wasn't working at that point. My eyes darted to the bed and saw one of their cameras had landed on it, while the other one lay shattered on the floor. I figured one of them was a woman. Regardless, I fetched some ropes from my drawer and tied both of them up. Afterward, I pulled their masks off and met the shock of my life. The invaders were my neighbors. What the hell are you both doing here? I was so shocked. At that point, I decided that I'd had enough of their misbehaviors. I immediately contacted a chief of police who was one of my dad's closest white friends. I told him about all my neighbors had been doing and the rumors they'd spread about me, including breaking into my house. Immediately, he sent some cops to my house. While they were on their way, I checked the camera, and from the footage, I saw that they'd come into my house to search for evidence of me doing illegal things. When the police came and took them, I followed. At the station, they were asked why they were being mean to me.
Well, we didn't expect a young black man like him to be this comfortable.
How can he afford the apartment without being involved in illegal things? Look at the car he drives. We believe he's into something illegal, so we came to find evidence. Just because he's black doesn't mean he's into illegal things. Going this length to prove that he's into illegal activities, just because he's black and young, is just plain racist and stupidity.
I bet they didn't expect the cops to support me. Anyway, I pressed charges against them. Fortunately, my dad had become a judge after his promotion and was also the judge of the case. My neighbors were found guilty of all, and my dad gave very long jail terms to them. The other people in the street, after knowing they'd been lied to, came and vandalized their house and also destroyed their cars as a warning to other racists. In the news the next week, our story was broadcasted to warn people against racism. I was proud to hear people calling me a hero for beating up my crazy neighbors and sending them to jail. As for my neighbors, about 6 months later, I heard they were both beaten to a pulp in jail after being racist to an Indian. Barely 3 months later, they had to be transferred to a more brutal prison as punishment for assaulting another black man. They never learn, do they?